Welcome to another episode of Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak, the home of Dallas Mavericks basketball and the Dallas Mavericks radio network. Kevin Gray here, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak. Really appreciate you joining me here. However, and wherever you may be listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcast for free, make sure you give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. Or if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to like and comment on the video as well. So excited for my guest today here on the show as we are now past the halfway point games-wise for your Dallas Mavericks as they get ready for the second half of their season. Unfortunately, it took a loss on Wednesday night to the Los Angeles Lakers, but nonetheless, good enough to be joined by beat writer for The Athletic, Tim Cato, good enough to join me here on the Inside the Mavs podcast. Tim, what's going on?
Nothing much, Kevin. I am still here in Los Angeles. That's the California sun that is giving me some weird front lighting. I don't know. I think that the lighting people behind movies would have a lot of critiques right now, but we're gonna roll with it. It's nice seeing the sun for once. We weren't doing that a lot in Dallas.
That's very true. In fact, while you were basking in the California sun, we were trying to get our pipes to unfreeze here because of how cold the weather has been over the last several days. But nonetheless,
is the city still there? When I come back, is it going to just we descended into anarchy, or is law still in effect?
We're still good. We're good here. Everything is good. Everything is tight and right. So when you come back, you will see everything still intact for the most part. That whole Mike McCarthy thing with Dallas and the Cowboys thing, that might have some other people jumping off a ledge. But everything else otherwise is good around here. So we appreciate your concern while you're basking in the sun in California there.
That's good. That's good to hear.
Well, let's jump into it. Unfortunately, the Mavericks took an L to the Los Angeles Lakers on Wednesday night. But what's interesting to me is, and we'll touch on it just before we move on, because I marvel at the fact that, and I'll start here because LeBron James, at 39 years of age, continues to play at a high level. And he, Anthony Davis, and D'Angelo Russell, they put on a show in LA. But from a Mavericks perspective, Luka Doncic comes back after missing the last 3 games with an ankle sprain. And how would you assess the way that he looked against the Lakers on Wednesday night?
This man has the best bad games I've ever seen in my entire life. What was it? 33, 13, and 10. And I thought that he was a little off at points in the first half, a little better in the second half, good in the second quarter too. I don't know, man. He's to be 33, 13, and 10, and for us to be thinking, well, that wasn't him at his best. I don't think it's first off, I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. I thought physically he looked good, ready to come back. That's what you would expect from an ankle injury. Just need a week to let it rest up. And as for the rest, I don't know. I'm not too worried about it. I've watched too much Luka, and I know that even what he did on Wednesday was plenty enough for the Mavericks to win if they had just hit 3-pointers. But both Luka and pretty much every single one of his teammates really struggled to do that, and that's really where the game was decided in my view of it.
Usually for this team, when they're knocking down 3-pointers, they're going to win a lot of games. When they don't knock down 3-pointers, Tim Hardaway Jr., as he didn't against Los Angeles on Wednesday, they're going to lose a lot of games. So for a team that is as dependent upon Luka and Kyrie as they are, it's about them knocking down shots. And when they do, they look really, really good. When they don't, it doesn't tend to look pretty. I guess that's the moniker of a make or miss league, I guess.
Yeah. I think that we've seen there's a lot of math and stats that say that the outlier shooting performances on either end, those are some of the strongest dictators of wins and losses in the NBA. If you are a team and you shoot around 20%, you're probably going to lose like 95% of the time. If you shoot over 50%, you're going to win 95% of the time. And that's what happened for Dallas. They finished a little bit higher than that, but at one point they were, I believe, 3-24, and they had the worst shooting percentage outside of that one game against the Rockets where Luka, Kyrie, and Dante Exum all didn't play. They had the worst shooting percentage of the season. And that's just not going to work. But that's also unlikely for a team that is second in makes and second in attempts in the NBA. I don't think another night like this is going to happen for them. At most, we're gonna see one more game where collectively all of the players struggle this much from the outside. And I know that's not a enjoyable, analysis to take from this, which is just basically throw it away and we can't analyze it. But that's kind of where I am. It's certainly not an excuse. And if you're a fan with emotional interest, you can be annoyed at the players. And there are a few other things that happened this game. The defense definitely regressed a little bit. But even the defense, where I thought it got away from Dallas was the third quarter. That's the quarter where the Lakers were running constantly. They were getting, a bunch of their 36 fast break points, came in those 12 minutes. And what did those come from? What did those most of the times when they were breaking down the court, when the Lakers were getting the kick ahead passes, it was off a missed three. Because missed threes bounce right out to the perimeter. And then all of a sudden you got a guy leaking out and you got somebody ready to outlet it. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be better in that area. It doesn't, again, not an excuse. You're going to have to play transition defense off missed threes when you're a team like this. But when I look at that game, it's really hard for me not to look at it all encompassing in a way that, this was an outlier shooting performance, and a lot of the bad things that we saw that led to the loss came from those missed shots.
And even with the loss, the Mavericks are 24-18 through 42 games. They played their 24th different starting lineup on Wednesday against Los Angeles. And as we kind of start to broaden our view of this team now that we have gotten to the midway point of the season, give me just your overall assessment of this team after everything that they've gone through from an injury perspective, the different lineups that they've had to play, the emergence of a 19-year-old rookie in Dereck Lively II. Where are you with this team now through 42 games through the season?
It's a team that has a higher floor than the one we saw last season. It's a team that I don't think is possible for them to collapse in the way that we saw them do last season, just because Lively brings more defense and just competency to that end. As does Derrick Jones Jr. And I think that the offensive pairing for Luka and Kyrie was always good last season. That was never the issue. And so I think it's a team that we know they will not collapse in the same way. They might have some bad losses here and there, and they certainly have. But I don't think that there's any way for this team to collapse, to end up out of the playoffs, to be 6 games over 500 and finish beneath it. I don't think that's going to happen this season. What I don't think we know about the team is just how high their ceiling is, because the ceiling is going to come from the 5 best players, and they didn't know who the 5 best players were until Dante Exum really emerged. And really, it's those 4. It's Luka and Kyrie, and it's Dereck Lively, and then it's Dante Exum. I want to see those 4 together, and we've still only seen them for less than 100 possessions, and not really fully unleashed for an entire game. Even when Exum came into the starting lineup, initially, that was for Grant Williams, who missed a couple games, and then Kyrie missed some time, and that's where Exum really emerged. I want to see what those 5 can do, because I think if there is a slightly higher ceiling than what we've seen, if this is a team that can go and beat, not just a Minnesota, but a Boston on Monday, and I don't think Exum's going to be back for that, but we'll see. He looks better. He's doing more on the court. But we'll see. That might be a little soon. But if it's a team that could, be competitive with a Boston, even if it's not going to be favored against any of these, really elite title contenders in the playoffs, just be competitive and make a game of it against some of these really elite teams. I want to see what those 4 or 5 players, what that starting lineup can do. Probably isn't going to be as good as those teams. And I think we know that. But I still want to see them play before making any grand conclusions about just how high this team's ceiling really is.
Let's stick with Derrick Jones Jr. and Dante Exum for a second, because the surprise that those 2 have been so far this year, both offensively and defensively, I don't think a lot of us anticipated we would see the kind of impact for the both of them and what they brought. Now, obviously, for Exum dealing with the injury that he's been dealing with for a little while now, but before then, on both ends of the floor, really making significant impacts. What was your understanding of what Jones Jr. and Exum's roles would be on this team before we started to see the emergence for both of them throughout the course of this year?
Jones Jr., I for sure thought was going to be a rotation player. I didn't realize he'd be a starter, but it made more sense to me after a couple games. But I thought he'd be a good fit. I thought he'd be one of those players who is athletic, has some on-ball capabilities, has some shooting ability, and defends really well. And we've seen a lot of those players come to Dallas, and Luka gets them paid. And it's not all Luka, but playing with Luka is such a good environment for players like that. So him being a 30 to 36 minute a night guy sometimes, that's a bit of a surprise to me. But looking back on it, it makes sense to me, and it especially makes sense to me because Chicago, especially last season, was very much the opposite environment, and it was one in the same way that Luka amplifies. I think that there's some neutralizing effect or de-amplification that happens from a Chicago team that had really rough spacing and did not shoot enough threes. Dante Exum, though, I did not think this man was going to be a rotation player. I thought that he would be further down the bench. I thought he would make sense for some games. As much as people talked about his better three-point shot, I still looked at his numbers and wasn't sure if he was going to take enough of them for that to really matter. And certainly, I think I underestimated just the overall ability and just a guy who can dribble and make decisions. A former point guard, still playing, not fully as a point guard. What does that term even mean anymore in the NBA?
Sure,
exactly. Just a guy you can trust with the ball in his hands, driving to the rim, making passes, and he has been so good in that area. And Dallas liked him for his defending, that's what I thought was going to get him minutes, as a semi-rotation guy. But once he showed that, he's really capable offensively too, that just completely changed my full perspective of him. I think Dallas is to some extent, and that's why there's so much, excitement for his return and. Just anticipation for all of that.
That's a Dennis Lindsay special with the Dante Exum reemergence with him. I'm sure Dennis Lindsay is getting some nice satisfaction about seeing Dante Exum.
Yeah, I think it was him. I will say I don't think Nico was hard to convince because Dante's agent is Kobe's old one.
Okay.
And so obviously there's going to be a close relationship between Nico Harrison and Kobe's agent. So.
Sure, no, makes sense. Well, he has played extremely well when he's been able to do so and provided them some length and some athleticism. What I've enjoyed most about this team, and I didn't think it was going to sustain itself, honestly, Tim, throughout the course of the year, but this team has remained a top 10 pace team throughout the course of the year. And Jason Kidd talked about it coming into the season that they wanted to get up and down the floor a little bit more in transition. And we saw that really take flight throughout the early portion of the year, but it's really kind of maintained itself even with the up and downs that we've seen from this team and the injuries that they've gone through. This team has played at a much different pace. Do you think that will continue to happen with Kyrie Irving and this team throughout the course of the rest of the season here?
I mean, if they're 42 games in and they've made it this far, I don't see why not. Some of it comes from the players and some of the players that Dallas is playing with, not having Reggie Bullock and replacing him with a Dereck Jones Jr. That is someone who just naturally was always going to increase your pace a little bit. Obviously, the main reason is Luka and Kyrie buying into it. And Luka still plays slow at times. It's just he's willing to play fast when, the situation kind of dictates it. And Kyrie is definitely a tempo pusher. Maybe a little bit too much. That was trying to push the tempo is what got him to go to the locker room early in the game. And then, he had I think 4 of 16 shooting night. So, there's going to be downsides like that, but yeah, I do expect the pace to continue. And honestly, you said it well. Like I thought they would maintain it for, a couple months, I thought it would be maybe average. I wasn't expecting to be top 10 all year. That has been one of the big surprises for me.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how this team has been able to adapt a different pace, but also at the top of it, Luka Doncic being willing to play that kind of pace and to come into the kind of shape that he did going into the season, and for the most part being able to maintain that. And for him going forward here, this team obviously is dependent on him as much as they are. Have you been able to see a little bit more balance, obviously, with Kyrie Irving, the emergence of Dereck Lively II, being able to take some of that pressure off of him, or is it always going to be Luka-centric? He's got to do it all, be the offensive hub for this team, and then everyone feed off of him. Is there a way to maybe strike a little bit more balance with him, even on the floor still?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that's needed. He's not touching the ball, and he's right up there in the league and in time of possession. I think Trae Young is the only one with more, but it's within all of these star players who dominate the ball. It's within the same area. He has it a little bit more than most, but he's a star player. This is what he's here to do. I don't think that he's going to become a Jokic-like player who, is doing, passing more and holding less. I don't think that's, I think with every year, it might be a good development for him to get a little bit more like that. But we've seen NBA titles won with players like LeBron, who, were very heliocentric and who were very, ball dominant for all the reasons that they should be. So I think that this is what you expect from a Luka, and I think that balance is pretty good when Kyrie is healthy and on a tear, and we'll just kind of wash away whatever happened against LA, because I think that was probably an outlier as well, and we'll go from there.
Sticking with those superstars, let's go to Kyrie Irving for a second, because when the Mavericks made the trade to acquire him last year, and obviously the situation that had gone down in Brooklyn, him not getting the extension, getting out of there, and then coming to Dallas, and the way things ended, coming into the year once he signed his extension, the question would be, how will those two coexist, fully formed together? And even with Luka's injuries that he's dealt with, Kyrie Irving, it feels like, has turned himself into leader veteran guy who is diving on the floor for loose balls, being able to do all the other little things. Even at one point, my man was still rebounding the heck out of the basketball right now. But at the same time,
that's what he says.
I know, right? Exactly. Doing all the other stuff. What have you made of Kyrie Irving and the fit that he's been with this Mavericks team, and a guy that, as you have covered him, seems like, quote unquote, more at peace with what is going on in his life and his situation based on him being on this team right now?
I think he's maybe one of the most adaptable superstars we've ever seen. He's fit into so many versions and so many different, he's fit next to so many different types of co-stars that I never really had any doubt that when he was on the court for Dallas, that he'd be good. He had sour relationships with all three of the previous franchises he played for. There's a lot of reasons for a lot of that. Some of them are not replicable in Dallas. Some of them still could show up. This history is not doomed to repeat itself, but when this is the guy's history, it is something to be aware of. But at the same time, it's reasonable to think that, now that he's over 30, now that, the end of his career is more in sight than it used to be, that he's got a role in Dallas that he does seem very happy and content with. This is, I don't see any reason to believe that this is not who just Kyrie is going to be the rest of his time in Dallas. I'm not going to guarantee that that's the case, but I think it's perfectly logical that this is just the type of player that he is. And as long as Luka is content and happy, and as long as everybody around the team is content and happy, and right now they are, that things will continue going well. And there's just some big ifs. Like there is still roster improvement that needs to be made to Dallas, and there are ways, but not as expansive ways as other teams and rivals around the league to make those improvements. And you reach a point where you have really tough questions if you're a team that has a superstar in its prime and needs to be contending. And we'll see what happens if and when Dallas reaches that point, or if they can just build this team and take it one step further, in the meantime. So, but as of right now, I think Kyrie is, calm and accepting of his role and all the ways that you've said and all the ways that he's said. I think he's also a very good basketball player. And, there's little doubt about his adaptability. And I think he's shown that once again that, he can play with or without Luka, or he can play with Luka not, even available for the game and do a little bit of carrying for the team, when they need him to. So I think that's where things stand, and we'll just see where they go.
And you started to kind of lead me down the direction where I wanted to go, because as we start looking toward the NBA trade deadline on February the 8th and what this team still needs to improve on, two guys I want to ask you about before we get to maybe some of the names or some of the things that, could happen for this team. Two names on this team currently being Josh Green and Grant Williams. What have been your evaluations of the two of them? I'll start with Williams because he was the guy that was their big quote unquote, acquisition, this past summer, and what his role has been, how it's evolved to the point where there's been some questions about what has been happening with him to where it hasn't gone as well, I'm sure, as the Mavericks would like it to so far.
I think he's a competent NBA rotation player who is playing worse than we would expect him to. I think that there's a few injury issues that have factored into that. Has had a bit of a wrist thing that has affected his shot a little bit, and a knee thing that has affected, just his mobility a little bit. I absolutely think that fans and the team and me as an analyst, want a little bit more from him. And if he can get back to being just a 40% catch and shoot shooter, 45 in today's NBA is perfectly realistic on open catch and shoot shots. And, that's the diet that he's been getting lately. And I think that this team needs one more really high level shooter. He showed he could be that early in the year, and he showed the value in that. And, if and when he gets back to that this season, I think that there is enough that he does that is competent, that's good. It's not stopper level defense, but it's above average for the most part. Especially if you just ask him to play team defense within a concept. I think he can get back there, and I don't think that, I think that player is perfectly priced for what he is. But all of that said, I really do understand why there's a bit of disappointment, because he has not been up to that standard over really the past month and a half.
And for Josh Green, a guy who got his extension before the season started, really up and down. They've kind of been enigmatic of what this team has been with the up and down roller coaster that they've been on. What have been your thoughts about what Josh Green has brought to this team this year?
One of the most confusing players I've ever watched. Kevin, I don't fully understand how this player can do just ridiculously good stuff, and then I forget he's on the court for a quarter.
Sure.
I think that clearly he has been someone who responds a bit better when the ball is in his hand a little bit more than it ever will be with when he's playing next to Luka. And I think other NBA teams have noticed that and see the upside and see the potential for it all to come together, and are not valuing him at that, but are valuing him with a player with untapped potential. And that is why he's the likeliest, or I think he's certainly the best player that Dallas would be willing to trade, that other teams are really interested in trading. Dallas willing to trade, what exactly that means, I don't have any brand new, intel to drop in here. But, I think that they, for the right deal, for the right player, for the right circumstance, Dallas likes Josh Green. They don't want to move on from him, just for nothing, certainly. But they understand that he is a player that they might have to move if the circumstances require it. As for, I still think that he contributes in his role on the team. I think the one area I'm more disappointed than, his offense has been inconsistent, but it shows up here and there, and overall the numbers are pretty good. I'm disappointed that he's still not consistently an above average defender. He really struggles with getting around screens. Maybe it's just his body type. You don't really get around screens in Aussie football. You all run into a big pile. So maybe he's just still conditioned for that to be the way things are. But that was a big reason why Jordan Hawkins went off a couple games ago against New Orleans. The loss to New Orleans that everybody thought Dallas should win, and certainly they were right. They should have won. It was a C team. Almost at least a B team for the Pelicans out there. And one of the players that popped off was Hawkins, and he's a run around screens guy, and Josh Green really couldn't affect him. Josh, for as athletic as he is, I just want to see a little bit more consistent impact on that end. I think that would be a good thing to see. But he's still young. He came into the league really young, and he's still younger than players who were drafted just last year. So I'm not, I find him confusing, but I certainly see the talent and the value. And, if that talent and value is the reason that he's traded, it just better be for the right trade that Dallas can make.
So let's take it there. As I mentioned, close to the NBA trade deadline, which is on February the 8th. We've heard names bantied about around this team. Pascal Siakam, of course, that's no longer a thing because, of course, now he's with the Indiana Pacers. But other names like a PJ Washington, a Kyle Kuzma, our old friend Dorian Finney-Smith, new reporting maybe a Jeremy Grant as well. Number one, what does this team need in your mind based on what you've observed so far? And do any of those names realistically potentially fit with the Mavericks based on what they have and what they may want to part with to acquire those players?
Dallas is definitely looking in the right places. They need a tall four. They're small. Then they need more size, and they need the option of more size. At times you can play lineups that look a lot like the ones Dallas has out there, but they need a 6'8", a 6'9", a 6'10" guy who can also play next to Lively and can also be a scorer and can also be a defender. I don't know if any of those players, Siakam was probably the best fit. And even him, wasn't 100% perfect, but obviously I think you're going to bet on that talent. You're going to bet on the, defensive upside that, the high end defense that he's shown at many points throughout his career. Like PJ Washington, I think he'd help the team. I don't know if that's, I don't think that's the contender move. Jeremy Grant, I kind of feel the same way. It's a lot of, like the idea of the 6'10" defense, two-way wing who rebounds really well, but also has some guard skills and can score 20 a night. Every player, every team, every franchise in the league wants that player. And about 5 of them exist that actually check all those boxes. And so Dallas is going to have to settle for, which aspects of, they're right that the size is a check mark. I think that is a good starting place. You can't just go get another 6'6" player on a roster filled with them. So they're right that they need to be looking for someone taller with size, with, a defensive mindset and rebounding ability. I think those are all of the traits that you start with, and then you see what else is available. Like even if they, if they can't find the guy, but there's a reasonable trade for Kelly Olynyk. And I'm not sure there would be a reasonable trade for Kelly Olynyk. I think that, he's going to be very solid. His market might be a decently sized one. Also, Utah's playing really well right now.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't mind, if that's the route they choose to go, if there's a way that without trading a first round pick, then give up some seconds and maybe even a player to go get somebody who fits as, short term as a big minute guy, and long term maybe you keep him around as a bench veteran. This is still a team that needs, another veteran or two off the bench. That's something that would make sense for me. But entering the season, last season, this whole time I've said it's probably next summer, or not this summer, the coming summer. That makes the most sense for a bigger deal to happen. And I still think that's the likelier case, even if Dallas is certainly active in looking at all of these players just to see. I still just think it's likelier that, when they have a few more first round picks next summer, that's probably when things are going to happen for them. But we'll see.
Last thing before we get you out of here today, because I want to make sure I touch on him. In terms of Jason Kidd, where are you with Jason Kidd as a head coach for this team? All the things that he's kind of had to deal with from, injury, lineup standpoint, the roster, changes that he has seen and what he's been able to manage here. He hit us the other day with the line, I'm just a coach, after their loss. I believe it was to the Pelicans after that particular loss. Where are you with Jason Kidd as the head coach of this team?
I think he's fine when the team's doing fine. And as long as the team is fine the rest of the season, I don't think that he is. I think that there's about like 5 coaches that really add something to a team, and maybe 5 that really subtract something. I think at most you're amplifying what a team can do by 10 or 15%. And maybe if you're a bad coach, it's more like 20, 25%. But it's like we forget the margins are amplifying what a team could be by about 10%. That matters. That's important. But it is not going to, solve a lack of talent. It's not going to turn, a 30-win team into a 50-win team. It's going to turn them into a 35-win team. And I think, he's just one of the guys in the middle. I have issues with various coaching things that he does, but I think that I've realized that he has some, absolute qualities. And, I think the locker room is and Luka and Kyrie together, you could argue, it's not the easiest locker room. Luka specifically is not the easiest superstar. And the locker room still has a lot of respect and faith in Jason Kidd. I think the lineups, when you understand them, when you look at them through the lens of experimentation, regular season is a test lab. He does it a bit much for my liking, but I don't think as many of the decisions he makes with all that stuff is. Sometimes Mavs Twitter is mad at stuff that I look at and I'm like, I don't know. I think it's justifiable. I really like the foul up 2 against Zion Williamson. So, he's got a lot of deserved criticism for late game situation stuff. And so I just thought it was cool and new to see him, respond in that way, respond in a late game situation and do something that a lot of coaches wouldn't do. And it worked out great. So I think that he is just one of the coaches in the middle of the league, whether he's below average, above average. I just don't think it really matters with that middle group, as long as the team's going fine. And I don't think he responded last season when things weren't going fine, but I just don't think that this season is going to replicate that.
How's your relationship with Mavs Twitter these days?
I don't know. I barely tweet anymore. So I think the quantity, the absence breeds, what do they call it? Familiarity, or they breeds something.
Yeah.
I'm always reading tweets. I'm around during games. You're
just in the shadows now, and you're in the background a little bit more these days.
Yeah.
When you not get your courts, when you don't have your courtside seat. I saw you on TV the other day. I said, "Oh, Tim got the nice, got the media seat out there on the front row there."
Yeah, always. Where I am.
There you go. That's where we can find you. Tim, tell the folks so they can find you. What you got going on, man?
Well, when I do tweet, I'm on Twitter, Tim_Cato. The Athletic subscribe. Go subscribe to our free podcast, the Only Mavericks podcast. We're also doing that. And yeah, that's about it. Wrote a cool story about how dunking hurts last month.
I saw that. What inspired that story, by the way?
Well, obviously, all the dunking that I do. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's something I'd heard and read, and I'd had actually the idea for like 5 years. I'd always thought that
Okay.
maybe I'm going to go back to, maybe I'm going to like really dive into it. And around this time last season, I was like, let's do it. And I got to the end of the year. I got to the end of last season, and I had enough reporting that I actually wrote a whole draft. And I kind of looked at it, and my editor kind of looked at it, and it was just like, it's not there yet. It's not there yet.
Yeah.
So I finished it up the first couple months of this season, and came out a little bit before Christmas, and it was fun to do. More of those coming soon.
Looking forward to that. I found it very, very fascinating, the idea that, hey man, while it's one of the coolest plays in sport, hey man, that thing takes a toll on your body when you're doing it all the time, especially when you're, really good at it. It can take a toll on your body a little bit. So Tim, I appreciate you hanging out with me today for a little bit, man, on the Inside the Mavs podcast, man. Thank you.
Of course, anytime.
That is it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, thank you to Tim Cato of The Athletic covering the Dallas Mavericks for joining me on the episode today. You can download and subscribe to Inside the Mavs wherever you get your podcast for free. The official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak, your home of Dallas Mavericks basketball. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak. Until next time, I'll talk to you later on Inside the Mavs. I'll talk to you later. Peace.